Welcome to Crossing Faiths. My name is Matt Hawkins with my friend John Pinna. We are a Christian and a Muslim who talk religion and politics. It's treacherous waters frequently, but we do it nonetheless. And our purpose here is to try to model civil conversation between two people who believe very different things about eternal things. And sometimes we even disagree about temporal things like politics and the manifestation of religion.
Artifacts, certainly
Yeah,
artifacts.
we certainly disagree on artifacts. Let's not
I love
go down that
artifacts.
rabbit
I think
trail.
they're the greatest. I think it's so fun. So
John,
that's all right. It's always
John is frequently fascinated by artifacts, religious artifacts, and that kind of thing. And I'm less so.
I don't know. You
Anyway,
do have a lot to say about it. You do have a lot to say. But it's okay. So
so
you're
so I a couple weeks ago I published an article at a place called the Gospel Coalition called "Why We Need the Church to Disciple Our Politics," which is pressing up against the stream of how we most often talk about religion and politics. And it's an article mostly for Christians, or at least speaking within the Christian bubble. But you saw some headlines this week and some articles that you think my article resonates with. So,
well. I
what's
think.
captured your attention in the religion news space?
Well, I think I sent you an email. It says you're current, you're relevant, and we need to talk about it now. So it was like I don't know how much I verbalized that statement, but I was like, we need to. So I mean, we got two great articles here. So one is about the Iraqi cardinal talking about religion and state needs to be separate, and 1 month after the papal visit, and we can kind of get into the conversation there. I mean, is this guy just doles out the best quotes about religious freedom that I've ever heard from anybody, period. He's just rolling out these great statements. So we'll get into that. And that's ties to your article, but sweet fancy Moses. And I understand this is way leftist, but what's worse than politics without religion? Question mark. Politicized religion. And this picture on this article from the Intelligencer, which I don't know if that's how real that entity is, but it's a great article by this guy who starts off with this picture that summarizes everything to me, because we were chatting back and forth on this, and I go, what? It's about the rally that occurred, right? The insurrection or whatever you want to call it. And but the picture is just great. It's like a bunch of dudes, and you even told me this. I go, what's going on in this picture? You got a bunch of dudes with Trump flags, American flags, and then they got this wooden cross that's weathered. And I was like, what's this guy doing with this cross? It's like he's really upset about it. And then you said they're all praying. They're all laying hands on each other and praying.
Yeah.
And then of course, in typical Johnny P fashion, there's a caption on the bottom. So part of me feels like you just read the caption and it says, who are these people really worshiping on January 6th? So they were worshiping. I mean, but the thing is this statement that just grabbed me, and I just said to myself, oh my God, this is Matthew's article. And it seems like I'm glad handing you a little bit, but the and I'm not pandering, but this is so relevant. The fusion of evangelical Christianity with the Republican Party blasphemy climax in the Trump cult. Among the Trump banners and Confederate flags in the crowd that invaded the Capitol on January 6th was a flurry of wooden crosses of it. And it says, and in wokenness, the younger generation are quite obviously replicating previous religious movements in America. Look at the zeal in their eyes and the relentless search for heresy, and the ostracation of sinners, and the mass confessions of iniquity. And the need to do good work every day. It's just a wonderful, wonderful phrase, a statement, series of sentences that summarizes I would think, the impetus of why you wrote this article. And I'm going to ask the question right now first with you is to you got to define disciple in your tribe, because no one knows what that word means when you say we need the
Right.
church to disciple our politics. So
Right.
and so why is that word relevant when it comes to this obvious this statement that says, oh God, things have gone so far off the tracks, which you and I talk about a little bit, but a lot actually, but and the focus is been on this since the insurrection. But in particular, this statement, this series of sentences as it relates to your article, and with a stepping off point of discipling, because clearly this picture is idol worship, clearly, right? I mean, these guys are.
Well, I think a lot of what we saw on January 6th was some form of political idolatry. A lot of people were just misled and fooled by people who were lying to them. But certainly, you had a very clear mashup of religion and politics, right? And which was unavoidable, like the photo in that article represents, and plenty of other pictures that and video that we saw from that day. The banner with Jesus's name on it. People were praying and singing Christian songs, and then the whole thing culminated in a siege of the Capitol, right? So the article that you were picking up, it's on the New York Magazine website, and written by a guy named Ed Kilgore, who is a Democrat strategist, and he's a former senior fellow at a place called Progressive Policy Institute. So his lingo, right, his rhetoric's going to be a little more fiery, a little more throw a few more through elbows. More so than I might.
Well, he's an instigator. Let's just be honest. He's an instigator. So,
but people are talking about this, right?
Yeah, but that statement is really good for, I think. But the word disciple, when you guys say that, what does it mean?
Yeah. That's a good point to clarify, because even within Christian circles, it's particularly evangelical life in America, it's a very common word, and so we're using it as a verb, which I actually don't think it's used like quite as a verb in Scripture, but we use it like a verb. Clearly, a person who follows as a noun, a person who follows somebody, follows a teacher. In this case, Jesus Christ, we call a disciple, right? Jesus had the core 12 disciples, and then many, many more. And
of course, Paul, who wasn't a disciple, which we're not going to get into.
Right.
But
Paul had his own disciples after persecuting disciples, and so a disciple is just someone who is learning, right? Who is sitting under the tutelage of a teacher who is learning. And in Christian circles, we call something called discipleship. And discipleship happens in both formal and informal ways, right? So Sunday school class or Bible study, those are forms of discipleship. The point is that we're helping each other mature as believers, right? And so as we grow older, we, Lord willing, also grow in the faith and grow in our maturity and closeness towards Christ. So that's what we mean by discipleship. And the reason I use that word in a title related to politics in particular was the fact that often when we talk about church and politics, we have two basic models. We have the partisan model, some of which you might call political idolatry, right? That a church is all in for one political party, and it has a reputation of being associated with a temporal political party that we have problems with. The problem is a lot of churches, the rest of us, I would say most churches reject that model rightly, but then we adopt a silent model, and so we just don't talk about politics. Right, and so you be quiet about it, right, and only talk about it when absolutely necessary. And the problem with that, or what I say is, sometimes what the excuse given is that Christians want to seek and be unified. They want to seek to be unified in the gospel, basically Christian doctrine and fellowship, and they want to focus on what they call, say, discipleship and evangelism. Of course, evangelism is sharing our faith, right? And the thing I do with you every week, right? I try to evangelize John, much to his chagrin.
But he doesn't know what Matthew doesn't know is I'm doing the same thing. Well, I always say we don't try to convert, but we have the same thing in Islam. It's tariqa means the path, right?
Yeah.
And so and it's probably the closest you could come to disciple in the sense that you mean it. It's located in Surah 29:69. And the idea is it's I think the translation would be the way or the path or the ways. And the idea, and I think that, you guys have some, like I said, the discipleship in Christianity. I'm trying to think of what it would be it'd be like when Hazrat Isa says, I am the way, that would be an equivalent definition to tariqa. That would be that would be the way I think we would look at it. Although who knows what the constituency that's listening to this would say, but I think that's how we would interpret it, the word discipleship in Islam.
Yeah. If you want to say it in a more simplistic manner, oversimplified manner, it's like discipleship is helping each other become a better Christian, right?
Right. The way, the path,
like the way you and other Muslims would try to help each other be better Muslims, right?
Yeah.
And so I use that word intentionally because often Christians want to not talk about politics for the sake of discipleship, right? So they don't want political things to get in the way of the potential for discipleship. Like I said, discipleship can be either formal or informal. Informal, might be two Christian men meeting regularly for breakfast or coffee or something, and discussing the faith and reading through the Bible together. And it happens, among women too. And so I kind of intentionally pressed against that because the problem is while I agree there's a problem with what we see in what I call the partisan church or the political idolatry stuff, I think the way we get to something like January 6th and the picture here and the critique from Ed Kilgore, the reason that comes about is because we're not talking about politics from a uniquely Christian perspective that's different than, say, coming up, we have an A to Z list, right, of Christian ethical positions on different issues. We talk about some of them here sometimes: abortion, immigration, bioethics, euthanasia. Those are, when we talk about those kinds of issues, people think we're talking about politics, which we are. But my point is that we don't have a uniquely Christian way of doing, like advancing politics in a way that's uniquely Christian. And so therefore that makes us vulnerable to partisan actors who want to recruit us either as individuals or as religious institutions to their cause when they bear no responsibility for the care and the reputation of, in our case, the Christian church. And so the local church, in our understanding, has a different set of responsibilities and a different set of obligations and a particular reputation, I would call it a witness, to protect and advance and showcase to the world that political parties, even at their best, even where they're most aligned with our Christian ethics positions from A to Z, they bear no responsibility. They bear no weight of Jesus' kingdom in a way that the local church does. And so my challenge to the local church is that we need to figure out a way to talk about politics in a way that's more fruitful, that isn't partisanized, and that also is not silenced. That's my shtick.
So it's easy for someone to just kind of co-opt the Christian constituency if they're speaking the words and anchoring on some of the issues that are important to the Christian community, right? Just like it happens in Islam. It happens all the time in Islam.
Sure.
And then before you know it, everybody's supporting them on either, like we were talking about, single issue voters, that type of thing, or you have somebody that says the rhetoric. I mean, since Trump lost the election, we had a tremendous amount of quiet, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with, the pulling of the Twitter accounts and all this other stuff.
Sure.
But, my friend was we were sitting having breakfast yesterday, and he's a Lutheran, like a like a super Lutheran, and he basically said to me, "Listen, you want to know what killed it for the pandemic is that after Trump lost the election, he basically just shut down, and so the rollout of the vaccine was hindered by that." And his whole case was, if he was worth his salt as a Christian, he would have persevered to protect not only his constituency, but protect the people, the American people, by rolling out the vaccine as fast as possible to the people. And that was like one of the major talking points, breaking points between him and how Trump wasn't stewarding the people in a Christian manner, post election, and that shows the salt he was made out of. And so, and it speaks to your point about how, well, maybe you have somebody who can co-opt the agenda by speaking the words and saying the sayings, but then if you don't have something that is coherent and a coherent agenda that you can activate and pressure maybe or influence politicians to disciple your and steward the agenda appropriately, this is the type of stuff that happens, which is what he was kind of saying.
Yeah, similar. And to clarify, look, we're as Christians in the public square, we're gonna try to partner with people who share similar policy goals as us. That on the face of it's not a problem, right? My conviction is that all of our tips and tricks for how to engage the public space as Christians is heavily individualistic, right? So we go participate to vote, run for office, all that kind of stuff, which is great. And we have lots of issue positions over which we either agree or disagree. But what we don't have is a uniquely Christian way for the local church to engage any of it. And so you have a situation where when a local church, say a pastor, thinks that, say, one of their church members is not acting Christianly in the political space or on a political issue, or has a position that is contrary to the conviction of the pastor and the church, the mere sense of the pastor asking the question, right, or even challenging a church member on such a thing is tantamount to picking a fight and splitting a church, right? And so it speaks not only to our lack of coherent political witness from the local church, it speaks to the fact that we've put ourselves in a place of authority over the local church or over our local pastors, so that we say, no, this is what I get to a little bit in our article. When the word political comes up, we use it in three different ways. Number one, we say Christians deploy the words politics or political with three main meanings. First, we deploy it imprecisely to mean partisan, right? And so when we say someone is being political, sometimes what we mean is that somebody's acting in a partisan manner, right? They're advancing, say, the Republican or Democrat ball in a way that's is more obligated to the political party than it is to, say, the church or a policy issue, right? And so examples of this would be, a church has the legal ability, the pastor has every political right or every legal right to speak to, quote, political issues, so policy issues that are in the public space. Abortion and immigration are good examples. Now, if a pastor endorses a political candidate, right, in an active election, that, technically speaking, is illegal under federal law, although often unenforced, or mostly unenforced. But that one is being partisan, right, the endorsement of the candidate. The other is being political, because it's speaking to a policy issue. One, I believe, the endorsement of a candidate is inappropriate and typically unhelpful for a pastor or any religious leader to do, because it's playing by the rules of the political party, not the rules of the house of worship. But speaking to a policy issue and educating your people on a Christian view of things from the pulpit, even, it's political. right? But it's not partisan, right? And so we want to make a distinction between political and partisan. The second way we typically use the word political is to silence debate, right? So this happens in church small groups. I've seen it. It happens on social media, particularly Facebook. It happens in the church hallway, right? When we say we use the accusation and the label political when somebody has taken a position on an issue that we disagree with, and so labeling it political is actually a backdoor way to cancel the discussion, right? Because it's ruled that we can't talk about such a thing because it's, quote, political, right? Which is really, I think, most often inappropriate for a Christian, because we believe that God is the creator of everything, and Christ cares about everything in life, and that the Bible is sufficient for all of life, right? And so when we deny the conversation, when we deny the opportunity to have a conversation among Christians in the local church, then we're both denying that God cares about everything, and we're denying that Scripture is sufficient to guide us on everything. Now, there are good or better ways, there are more Christian ways to discuss such things, but to just censor certain things by labeling an issue political is something to keep an eye out for. And then the broader way that I think you and I tend to use the terms political and politics is in the broadest sense, kind of the Aristotelian sense. It's about the public space. It's about people living in the public square, individuals and institutions, and we all got to get along, right? And figuring out how to do that, both in the context of civil society, institutions like churches and like Rotary clubs and schools, and with in relation to the government, both as individuals and institutions. It's the big ball of wax called politics, and political, I think, is a more accurate way to describe such things. And so when we want to label something partisan, right? We ought to use the word partisan for precision. And then when we talk about politics, understand that often we're talking about electoral politics and campaigning and that kind of thing, but that's just a slice of our political life. Do you find that to be similar in Muslim circles? Do you have that kind of squishy, imprecise use of words political and politics?
Well, it's difficult because one of my passions, what I've been trying to do is take backwards, right? So if I can't say, oh, he's my Muslim brother, or I can't say that because the Muslim brother has taken those words, right? When it comes to political Islam, it generally means a radical anti-colonial movement that's geared towards anti-Western thought. So if you start linking political and Islam together, and right. if I say that, political Islam, right away you think, oh my gosh.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. So all right. So like right now there's the FBI who's watching this right now. They're going, oh God, here goes John again. So let's start the file up. So
it's already loaded, right?
It's already loaded.
Out the gate.
It's already at the gate. It's like the word jihad, right? So the word jihad is supposed to mean struggle, right? Struggle. So there's all these different nuances. And I always say jihad al-jung, right? Which is jihad of the tongue. If someone's lying, you're obligated to step in, right? And it's like when we were talking about tariqah earlier, discipleship. If the Quran is a living word of Allah, right? Living word of God, right? So here we are, and you're thinking about this term of discipleship. You are meant to then continue on the path, live it, but also be executing it in your daily life, which is why you can't be indifferent if you're Muslim. You have to act on the side of justice and for the forces of good. So anybody we're talking about political Islam, it's this co-opted political agenda, anti-colonial movement, right? That's co-opted with the religion in order to do something, much like what happened in Washington during the insurrection. So here we have this Trump cult, right? And you have Baghdadi, which is political Islam, right? The ISIS imam, right? Or the guy who claimed to be an imam who was leading ISIS. I think that all these guys should be stripped of their titles of imam. And so I think that we have in Islam a very strong sort of coherence to what you're saying when it comes to the word political. Although it means something else. When you say political, people don't use it to cancel, like you're talking about the conversation. Right away, people have an aversion to it and everybody goes the other way, right? And then you have strong groups that are involved in political Islam, like the Muslim Brotherhood, like, you know, ISIS and Daesh and Al Qaeda and all these people who have a very strong narrative around the word political that immediately no one wants to be associated with. So you know, and that's one, unless you are part of those groups. So which is what I've struggled with for 20 years, you know, in the last certainly 15 years of my career with Islam. So there's different qualifiers with the word political, but the intent is actually the same as the explicit events that culminated in the storming of the Capitol within Islam. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you were trying to make my point here, within saying that, say, American Muslims needed to figure out a way to talk about politics, the public square, in the way that I defined it, like how would you talk about that?
Well, I think that it's very different than 20 years ago. So for 50 years, the conversation, the political influence in Washington and globally has been with a very small group of entities who are political Islam. Okay.
Right.
And the alternate voice was a single entity for the first, from 2000, let's just say, all the way through to 2010. It was a single voice.
Yeah.
And so the American Islamic Congress was the alternative voice for Islam advocacy. I'll give you, and you know, we had multi-faith staff. We had all this. We had programs that advocated. We're the first to advocate for religious freedom. First Muslim organization to advocate for religious freedom. That was one of the things that I spearheaded. That's one. And everybody told me I was crazy. Even all the groups that were funded by the Muslim Brotherhood and all these different entities who had a 50-year head start and all the funding in the world told me I was crazy. And you know, they advocate for religious freedom, but let's define it in a very narrow context. Now, though, there is such diversity in the American Muslim constituency and the organizations that represent the political agenda. So, like, there's Muslims for Progressive Values. So they do, like, green technology is one of their deals. You know, they're on like 100 campuses all over the United States. They've got a huge constituency. They're basically progressive Muslims, right? There's a number of different other organizations that are out there that are spending quite a bit of time, and the diversity within the Muslim constituency now and the organizations, the NGOs, non-governmental organizations that represent them, is vast. You know, there's a Center for Islam and Religious Freedom. There's my NGO, which is Muslims for Muslims. So we're set intrafaith. And so there's much more diversity. And I think it's much more of a maturized sort of a model that is specific to the decentralized nature of Islam. And it is really cracked the stronghold that these organizations that have had a 50-year head start on anybody else have had in Washington. I mean, their influence is really dramatically diminished. Yet, I think that the biggest problem, like, you know, the Republicans with evangelicals, for example, the Democrats have traditionally pandered to and cultivated relationships with the Muslim Brotherhood or these Muslim Brotherhood organizations, and they're gatekeepers. And I'll give you an example. There's a WhatsApp. There's a WhatsApp text chain, you know, group that's just of these government workers that work in these different agencies. So they were around in the Trump era, right? They were around in Bush, they were around in Obama, and they're around now, and they coordinate all these activities, and they're all part of the Muslim Brotherhood people that have got appointed into this. And so they, like me, I'm not a part of it, right? I can't, they you know, I was put on for literally
That
30 seconds. And then they said, you know, what is Yahya doing on here? And immediately 3 people said, get him off. We don't want him to, and that was it.
Now, when you say coordinate, what do you mean?
They coordinate, they talk about political issues. They talk about the policy issues, and then they talk about how they will essentially coordinate activities.
Yeah.
But that's
So,
not
so like,
that's not
like
unique.
any right. That's what I'm saying. It's not unique to any other
No,
American
there's
affinity group.
feminists that do that that work
Right.
in agencies. There's conservatives that do that work in agencies. So it's not sinister in this
Yeah.
in the sense, but right away they were like, this guy's not part of us or of our agenda. We need to do this. It's not about diversity in conversation, right? So and bringing on of innovative ideas or even differing opinions to say, look, like you and I, we differ all the time, but the reason why we're buddies more or less is because you would come to me with something and say, this is what we're working on. And I'd say, we can't support it as long as you have this, this, and this in it. And if you were to die on these 3 hills, I can't support it. But let me tell you how to translate those into digestible pieces to my constituency so that I will bring it to my crew and they will take a look at it and then maybe they'll go along with it. But I could see maybe right now you got 0 supporters. You probably could get 30% if you change these 3 things,
Right.
And,
yeah.
and I think that, so the diversity, I would argue the diversity is much different than it was even 10 years ago with the Muslim constituency. And there's much more specialized NGOs that pander to the different parts of the constituency, which is very healthy. I think that's one. 2 is, I think that there's much more of a thoughtful engagement. There's millions, there's millions of conversations, for example, that there's a very strong Muslim presence in that organization. There's, Manal Omar, who was a guest on Crossing Faith, as a cross deals with, issues to do with women and gender and self-discovery, but it also deals with the broader sense of freedom of expression of all religions, including Islam, but encouraging specifically, Muslim communities to express themselves. I think that's an outcropping of political Islam and being so stifled by all these organizations that defined what Islam is, interpreted religious text, defined what Islam is, and then told you how to be a Muslim. And I'm talking specifically about the groups that claim to represent Islam for those 50 years, And so when it comes to you and your organization or your article, I think the idea that some of the touch points are very, very different, but you have a radicalized end element. You have Wahhabis within your midst, and they are essentially defining what Christianity, interpreting religious text, defining what a Christian is, and then telling people how to be Christian, right? And maybe one step further, and then saying that everything else and all that equals to being an American, and therefore you're on the other side. You're an enemy of if you're not doing this.
Yeah.
And at least that's how it seems from the outside. And that's exactly what we've been dealing with in Islam since political Islam really got funded by big Saudi oil money. So I think that's really an interesting similarity about the struggle and the conversations that are happening right now within your constituency. I don't know. Is that a fair? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's good for kind of folks in my orbit, my Christian orbit, to hear that that's your perception of things. I would nuance it a little naturally. I think the core people who are the hardest right-wing folks that really agitate and organize the January 6th kinds of events are actually very much not churched. These are largely unchurched people, or they may be Christians in name, but don't have a really meaningful what we would call membership, formal membership in a local body, and so they're kind it's kind of a type of cultural Christian that has really synthesized this white nationalism stuff together. And not everybody in white evangelical churches who voted for Trump was in that category, but when the church, a local church, doesn't speak to political issues, then your entire membership, our political views are shaped by everything other than the church, right? And again, if God cares about all the world, and if Scripture is sufficient for all of life, then we're really setting Christian individuals up for failure, and we're making ourselves vulnerable to folks like on the white nationalists and the hard right. And so if the church isn't giving folks the lingo and isn't sensitizing folks to the dangers of that rightward irreligious expressions, then people are going to get sucked into it. We see it pretty frequently. Does that make sense?
Well, that's what happened with us for 50 years. The only people that represented Islam was a small group of these small group of entities, 3 or 4 entities, and they're still around now. But if you wanted to get involved in politics, you had to intern with them. And if you were shouting as loud as you could, they would drown you out and either say, come into the fold, or we will destroy you. Right. Yeah. And, these are all the groups that have been washed in for a long, long time. And so I think that, and it's very similar to what you're talking about. Now there's such diversity though. And this has really only happened in the last 10 years. And like I said, the issues are there, and there's a will, and there's a will, and there's funding, because which means that people are willing to donate and give, and meaning time and effort and everything else, to bring these organizations enough, I would say, enough money, enough power, enough hustle behind them to actually give them a seat at the table, or try to get a seat at the table. The problem is the political parties are pandering to what they know and who they're comfortable with, which means that sometimes the tables are turned. I'll give you a great example. The Trump administration say what they want, but I brought the first group of Muslims into the White House that were representing the four maktabs in Islam, that are in adherence to the Amman conference, the Amman message. So what's mainstream Islam on the Shia and Sunni side? Okay. So we had representation at the table of the Sunni and Shia, the 4 major sects, 8 total. And it was the first time that had ever happened. And it wasn't so much that it was for the White House, as much as it was for everybody sitting at the table and going, and sitting, and we all came out and they go, this is the first time we've ever done this. Yeah. In a political setting where everyone's been at the table, and it didn't go anywhere because the White House never carried the water any farther. But the point is that it was, that moment in time was so important. Yeah. And everybody asked what my role was, and I just said, well, I don't represent Islam. I just bring people to the table. That's what I do. So I think that there's an amazing, you're at an amazing crossroads, at least the community, the evangelical community in particular, to take some time to do some intra-faith, and there is an intra-faith component now at a level which I don't think has ever existed. To really, you gotta, is it Copeland? You gotta go to all these people. You gotta get these, that there's some kind of engagement that's happening to really figure out what those political views are. Yeah. And then catalyze that into something, even if it's extremist. Like I always say, everybody deserves a seat at the table. And even some of the worst actors, because you want to make sure you know who they are and what they're about. So.
Sorry, can you hear me? My camera's being
can hear you.
Funky.
I just figured you're shutting me
I'll
off.
keep talking. I got a phone call and it somehow wrecked my video feed. So let me see if I can fix this here.
It's right. So I think that's an important way to kind of go about it. I think that the next article you need to write is, what's the first part in discipleship in the Christian church is engage, and how do we do that? I think you just wanted to pan to Roll Top Productions because the Roll Top Productions is a name of your is the namesake of your desk.
Okay, pardon the technical difficulties here. Okay, all right, you can hear me again still and can see me. So yeah, so here we can wrap this up here. My caution to pastors, and I think this extends to clergy of any religious body, including imams and rabbis, is look. Political parties and candidates, they hire people. They often hire people like me and John. Not me specifically. I haven't actually done this, but they hire people with our kinds of expertise to court you and bring you along into the fold to support either their candidacy or their initiatives. And sometimes you want to go along with that, and that's fine. But you really need to know the tricks of the trade and understand that people are being paid and making money to cultivate your support and interest. And what I want to underscore to you is, and I say you as in an audience of clergy, who are you paying? Or who do you have a relationship with who is advising you on how to engage the political space? And my bet is most people don't have that kind of counsel, that kind of wise counsel who has the best interest of the clergy member and more specifically and more broadly their local institution, whether that's a religious NGO or whether it's a house of worship. And so I think it behooves clergy members from across religions to develop their own strategy for political witness and policy engagement, because if you don't, your people and your institution are going to be vulnerable to political parties who want to use you to get their job done. In some cases, you'll align with their interest, and that's fine. In other cases, it's possible for you to be taken advantage of, and certainly possible for the members of your body to be taken advantage of. So that's why I encourage, particularly within the Christian space, but even others, develop, cultivate, do whatever you need to do to have a strategy for political witness that's unique to your faith and your particular local institution. There's a lot more to talk about there, but that's my soapbox.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's really important as two people. I mean, you represented your church, I represented my constituency from a perspective of bringing people to the table. And the problem is that if whoever's representing you is defining who you are and pressing agenda items as a do this and you'll get this, that sort of thing, you got to be very suspect to that on the surface, and then even deeper of how far it's going to bring you down the rabbit hole into supporting an agenda item or an individual or a candidate that is not representative of your body, right? So, and your agenda. I mean, as people of faith, our agenda is eternal and forever, right? So, to use the sort of Christian idea behind us is eternity and all its business. So here's the deal: is that it's really important to figure out who you're aligned with, and having someone that's more like you. I mean, you're right of center. I'm probably right of center, and although I'm, like I said, more, I might. It depends on which issue. But the fact is that it's very, very difficult when you bring people on board to represent your agenda, and they are really trying to cultivate the entire constituency to support the candidate rather than focus on the constituency's issues.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Is exactly right. Political parties and candidates want clergy support for two reasons. Maybe you have more, but I have two cold reasons. Number one, moral authority. They want the moral authority that comes with a clergy supporting it. And then number two, they assume you have numbers, right? So it's a numeric game because you have a constituency yourself that meets under your leadership at least once a week, and so that's why politicians care about clergy, moral authority, and head count. That's a cold way to put it, but that's the truth. And you might want to lend your moral authority and moral credibility and your constituency to a particular cause, but you need to go into it with your eyes wide open, and you need to be cautious about doing things that are unique, I think, to your local house of worship, and strategic, not for the sake of the issue necessarily, but for the strategic, let's say, long-term witness of your community. So I'll let it rest there.
Yeah, it's different with Muslims. When a politician goes after Muslims and tries to get them, it's to show diversity, that they care about diversity.
Yeah.
To show that and to get the numbers. And the third thing is very strange, like to show that somehow that they're willing to. It's not a diversity thing. It sounds like it, but it's more to show, like, you know what? I'm asserting there's good Muslims, and I'm showing you that there's good Muslims, and I don't know how to characterize that. But it's like sort of this sort of magnanimous sort of false concerning of the community, and it's not a genuine caring or want to engage the community to find out the issues. Which is why the community struggles so much.
Yeah. I'd still say that and the diversity point, I would still lump in as subcategories of the moral authority thing. Right?
Yeah,
so
I mean, nobody cares diversity, about moral authority in America. I think that generally that everyone's afraid to go down that road because
right. But for what I mean is that diversity is in this environment, in our current cultural era. Diversity is a moral good, particularly on the political left, right? And often on the political right, frankly. But if you can, in that way, if Muslims are being, tapped or used, right, to facilitate the appearance of diversity or actual diversity, right, that in and of itself is a moral thing, right? Or you're lending moral credibility because someone can say, I affirm diversity and see this is what I'm doing over here. Not that shouldn't be done. I'm just saying it's still something to be aware of.
I had a conversation. We can end with this if you want. I had a conversation with a high-level official in the current administration and a high-level official working for one of the leaders in Congress, and basically said, we would love to have you, John, as an appointee, but your name isn't ethnic enough and you're not dark enough. And that to me sums it all up. And I said, boy, you have a lot of respect for the Muslim community. You have a lot of respect for the Muslim community. So
at least he said it straight up. At least he said it straight up to you.
What's that?
At least he said it straight up to you instead of ghosting you.
The Obama administration said the same thing to me. Said I'm paraphrasing with the Obama administration, but the same thing. And so it's that's the problem, is that there's an idea of what things should look like and be, and it doesn't matter how competent you are or that they talk that they'll ping you all the time for opinions and for advice and guidance and access. But the problem is like, this is the idea, is like, you're not the kind of Muslim that we would like to have in that situation, because it's more about the superficialities. And that's what we're talking about here, is someone that panders to the superficialities. So if they find somebody that has the name they like and is the color they want, then they may not have the appropriate political acumen or background to execute an agenda that's appropriate to the Muslim community, but also for the agenda, political will that dominates the day. So it's very disturbing. So maybe that's a good point to end with. So
it's a good point to end on. All right, we are Crossing Faiths on YouTube and also anywhere you find your podcasts, and at crossingfaiths.com. John, see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week, Bob. Thanks, Bob.